Then block his blind jab. Counter with cross to left cheek. Discombobulate.
As an autistic person, job interviews have always been extremely difficult for me. And more than, just that way that
nobody likes interviews.
Now, I am certainly improving and have improved my speaking to a camera skills after a year and a half of making YouTube videos. But those pesky speaking to real people skills, or otherwise known as job interview skills, they kind of passed me by a little bit. And that's not for lack of trying. I really struggled to find any kind of a full-time job after interviews that I had. And then when we moved from the UK to the Netherlands, I basically just took the approach of giving up, which is not something that I'm going to recommend to you guys. Now, I wasn't going to make a video with my and have improved my speaking to a camera skills after a year and a half of making YouTube videos, but those pesky speaking to would just... The tips aimed at autistic people for job interviews were invariably about masking, specifically dampening down your autistic self to be more presentable or professionally acceptable. And you could say that everybody does this, especially at interviews, but when autistic people mask, it is at the expense of their physical and mental health. And our ability to remain in employment should not depend on keeping up a damaging facade for many years. Not to mention that some of these tips that I found, like making sure that you're clean and well dressed, of course that's going to be helpful, but it obscures the fact that people make judgments about other people within seconds
video on this month's theme of Asperger's and employment is good jobs for people with Asperger's. So if you haven't already had your say by voting, check out this video. Have your say there for this week. So in this video we'll be breaking a few stereotypes. I'll be going through 2 essential qualities of what makes for an Aspie-friendly job. And then finally I'll offer you my own personal tip on how to find the right job fit for you. Okay, so what are some of the stereotypes that already exist out there? I mean, think of what were you expecting to see when you clicked on the video that said good jobs for Asperger's. So some of the stereotypes are IT jobs, technical jobs, programming jobs, engineering, science-based, research-based, all of the kind of jobs where a person is usually working alone and usually a subject matter expert really getting deep into their own special interest, whatever that might be. And I guess the first stereotype I want to break is that what makes a job Aspie-friendly doesn't actually have anything to do with the field or the work itself. It's more the conditions that go around that work that make it either friendly or not. So I know very successful Aspies who work as lawyers and psychologists and musicians and artists and what else? I'm basically just going down the list of friends. What do they do? So what else? Personal trainers, politicians, social workers. Basically any profession you can name, there will be people on the spectrum who do very, very well in those professions. So why do we even have these stereotypes, right? Where did they come from? Why do we have this idea that Aspies are best suited for these kind of socially isolating technical jobs? And I think that one of the reasons is this first essential quality of what makes for an Aspie-friendly job, which is that the job is performance-based. And what I mean by that is that the person knows exactly what they're supposed to do and they can be quite easily measured to say, yes, you're doing a good job. Yes, I'm doing a good job. So the reason that that is so important is because if the outcome and the product that you're making is more important than how you get there, then I can choose for myself how I get there. So my boss might ask me to do something and I will say, great. Can I do that in my own time, on the weekend, standing on my head with a blindfold? And my boss will say, sure, I don't really care how you do it, I just want you to get it done. And that allows for an incredible amount of flexibility for the Aspie to work things around and do things the way that I work best. It's a huge amount of motivation because all of a sudden work is actually fun, and the performance that I am able to get when I'm able to actually control those kind of environmental factors is huge. So I get the ego boost of doing a really, really good job and being sure that I'm doing a really, really good job. And finally, because I'm being so hyper-productive and because it's so easy to show how productive I'm being, I get the reward that I deserve. When I do a good job, I get rewarded. So I'll give you a counterexample of that. When I was working as an engineer, I was basically paid by the hour. I was on flexi time, I had really good conditions, but how the company knew that I was working was I was filling in a timesheet, clocking in, clocking out, and that was it. So what I would end up doing is I would end up coming in really early and I'd be in this zone of hyper-productivity and I would work flat out for 6 hours, and I'd probably get like a week's worth of work done in those 6 hours. But the problem was that at the end of those 6 hours, my brain would be completely fried and I wouldn't really be able to do very much else useful for the rest of the day. So unfortunately, because of the system, I wasn't really allowed to go home after 6 hours. I had to stay for my 8 or 10 hours or more, depending on how much overtime the people around me were working. So what that meant was that when I came back into work the next day, I hadn't had enough time to recover, which meant that the whole next day, my brain was still fried, I was still in this unproductive mode where I was reasonably useless in terms of actually getting real results. So that was a big disadvantage at work. Fortunately for me, the quality of my work was good enough that I managed to make sure that that wasn't a problem. But if I were in a situation where all I needed to do was get the job done, and it didn't matter if I took 5 days or 5 minutes, then I would be able to make sure that that flexibility happened and make sure that I could do things my way, and I don't have to explain to anyone else what I'm doing. All I need to do is prove to them that it works by showing them the results at the end. So that's the first quality. Having a performance-based job makes it a lot easier to ask for flexibility when you need it. So the second quality is to have a communication culture that is reasonably direct, honest, open to feedback, all of those kind of things. It's quite common for people on the spectrum to find the intricacies of complicated social interactions to be really difficult. So I am bound to, at some point, annoy someone or piss someone off or create some form of misunderstanding. That's kind of like a given whenever I interact with, humans. So if I'm in a workplace that has a culture that avoids conflict, that is really, really hard to come back when there is a misunderstanding, because I can't talk to anyone about it. So there are essentially two reasons why that culture is very important. First, it allows me more flexibility in terms of just being blunt when I might not be really sure how best to sugarcoat a message. I know the message needs to be delivered. I know sugarcoating it is really hard, but the message is really important, but I don't want to offend anyone. But in a culture where it's reasonably direct, I can just say it, and I know that the consequences won't be too severe for me. And the second point is the opposite. When I do something wrong, I need others to know that they don't need to sugarcoat the message. I just need the feedback. Because if you don't give me the feedback, I'm not going to know what I did wrong, and I'm just going to keep doing that thing and keep pissing people off. And if that goes on for too long, then there's lots of secondary social side effects of people not liking you, people unconsciously ostracizing you, talking to you less, and anyway, it snowballs out of control if I don't get the feedback and if I don't get the opportunity to try and stop doing whatever I'm doing that pisses people off, or at the very least, if it's something that I can't stop doing or something that I need to do, we need to have that conversation so that the issue is resolved one way or the other. Okay, so with all that in mind, my personal tip to help find a job fit that's right for you is don't think about this in terms of I'm an Aspie, therefore I have a particular profession. When looking for a job or a profession or any kind of career direction, you can basically go down two paths. You can go down the path of I'm really passionate about this subject. I am willing to work really, really, really hard because I am inherently internally motivated to do that. Or you could go the opposite approach of I am not particularly motivated to do this thing, but it comes so easily to me, right? I am so much better at this than most of the people in the population that I can do a very highly valued job for not really much of my internal resources and get paid well for doing it. And it doesn't need to be fancy. I was talking to an Aspie at a support group meeting once, and he said at his job, he is the guy who unpacks the crates. And he loves it because it's so easy and he can turn his mind off, and no one else at the company wants to do it because they think it's boring, but he thinks it's relaxing. So that was perfect for him because it was a job he was good at and could do really easily. And on the other side, I know people who have had almost no natural talent in a particular area, but because they are so internally motivated, they just keep working and keep trying. They try so much harder than everyone else that they end up doing really well. So my philosophy on the whole purpose of work is that we need to keep ourselves busy, express ourselves somehow, and be sustainable financially. So you don't necessarily need to do all of those things in the one job. It would be amazing if you could get a job doing something you're really good at in an area that you're really passionate about that also supports you financially. That would be amazing, but it doesn't always work out that way. So I know for myself, there are some things that I'm just really good at which means that if I get some kind of performance-based job, I can spend a relatively small amount of my time doing something that comes very easily to me, that is very valuable to someone else, that I get paid quite well for. That means I'm financially sustainable, and then I've got the time and the energy to follow my passion and express myself and do all of those other things in a different time that's not my job. So that attitude has definitely served me well in making sure I'm financially stable. So anyway, I might leave it there for today. This is an absolutely massive topic, and I've really only offered just a couple of quick thoughts on that today. Thanks everyone who voted for this topic. There's still time to vote for next week's employment themed video, and make sure you check out my special live event next week on the topic of getting a job and keeping a job. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and I'll see you again next time. Okay. Okay, so Asperger's and employment. This topic has been by far the most requested thing that people keep asking me to talk about. So clearly it's a really big issue for a lot of people on the spectrum. So today I'm going to be talking about two main areas that we need to look at in terms of maintaining successful employment. So the first one is getting a job, and the second one is keeping a job. And they are quite different areas which require quite different skill sets. So just because you're good at one does not necessarily mean you're good at the other. I know several people on the spectrum who are insanely good at getting jobs, but never seem to keep them for more than 6 months. Hopefully by the end of this video, you'll get a sense of the common challenges that people on the spectrum face when trying to get a job and when trying to keep a job. And hopefully you've got a couple of ideas of how you yourself can try and overcome those challenges if you're on the spectrum. So when it comes to getting a job, I'm going to outline two different approaches that you can use in terms of that. And when it comes to keeping a job, I'm going to talk about the 4 most common areas that people have issues with that kind of need to be monitored at all times to make sure that we keep them under control and they don't explode into bigger problems. Okay, so getting a job. There are essentially 2 ways of getting a job. The first one is by people who already know me offering me a job. And the second one is if I find a job advertised somewhere and I go and apply for it even though they don't know me yet. Now, the reason I mention both of these is because it's really easy to think that the way you get a job is you find a job advertised and you apply for it. But actually there are a huge amount of jobs that come up and get filled without ever going through that sort of official advertising process. So someone like me who is not particularly good at networking and maintaining those kind of weak social connections that you need for that, I find that pretty difficult in general. However, my strategy there, because there's actually a gold mine there of opportunities that I really want to tap into, but the way I go about that is kind of a passive way. I just try and do the best job I possibly can every opportunity that I get, and I just hope that my work will speak for itself, and I try and impress people with the quality of the work that I do, and then they will just naturally think of me later. Because for me, I really struggle at selling myself, whereas I'm really good at impressing people with my work. So that's kind of what I rely on in terms of trying to find a job through networks. So the second way of getting a job is where you find a job advertised where they don't already know you. And this one can be particularly challenging for people on the spectrum precisely because it relies very, very heavily on first impressions. And I know that myself, I don't always give a good first impression unless I'm putting a lot of effort into that. So some people will just say things like, oh, just be yourself and act natural and all those kind of things. That's probably the worst advice I've ever heard for me, because if I do that, I inevitably seem a little bit weird, and that can lead to a less than favourable first impression. However, it can also work to your advantage. In my case, I am not naturally good at interviewing, for example, but I practice and practice and practice and practice and practice and practice and practice until by the time I get to an interview, I know exactly what to wear, I know exactly what to say, I know exactly how to behave and what questions to ask and what not to say and all of those things. And I essentially put on a show and perform for that 10 minutes or half an hour, whatever it is. And because I've put so much effort into doing that really well, then that has opened up a lot of doors for me. However, that was clearly not a natural skill of mine. And actually, I can remember a little while back, before there was a big interview coming up, and I was telling a friend that, oh, I'm going for a big interview. And so we did a bit of a practice. And the first thing she said was, okay, so tell me a bit about yourself. And my response was, well, what do you want to know? Which is a terrible response to that question. So clearly I hadn't practiced enough for that point. But by the time I got to the job interview, when they said, so tell me a bit about yourself, I went bam, 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 bam. All of these things that I knew were really a really good way to reflect who I am, exactly what they wanted to hear, and essentially proved to them that I was a good fit for the job and I knew what the job was and that I was socially aware enough to do all the right things and say all the right things. For better or worse, you kind of get one shot at a first impression, and there's no point trying to ask for any concessions at that stage. So unfortunately, anything about me that's a little bit weird or a little bit difficult to understand, or any accommodations that I might need to do a good job, I'm not allowed to show that in that first impression. Otherwise, it will seriously hurt me. The harsh reality is you get no concessions on that first impression. So an example of that is I've got a friend who has Asperger's and OCD, and the OCD means he doesn't like touching things for journalism, right? So shaking hands is really difficult. But professionally, he needed to learn how to shake hands, because in that first 10 seconds, you can't say, hi, my name is, sorry, I don't shake hands. People aren't going to understand in that first impression. There's no time to explain those first 10 seconds. If there is something that you're supposed to do, like wear a suit and tie, shake someone's hand, look them in the eye, all of those kind of things, if you find them really difficult, unfortunately, the answer is bad luck, do your best, just do your best, and hopefully it's good enough. Because in that first moment, there is no opportunity to ask someone else to try and understand you from your perspective. If you make a good first impression, then later on down the track, when they already like you, you can say, so can you please put some effort into trying to understand me, because I work with this, I need this concession, this makes a really big difference to me, all of these things. And a good example of that is I would never say that I have Asperger's or autism up front before the person knew me. I might consider saying it in an interview if I was really, really confident that they already liked me, already thought I was amazing. And then I might mention Asperger's and link it to the amazing and say, see all of these things that you're already impressed with, that's due to the Asperger's, and that's part of me, and I'm bringing myself, and this is my personality, and all of that kind of stuff. However, that's only after they like me. I would never say that in advance, because every time you give someone something they're not expecting, it's a barrier, and they're sort of like, oh, I wasn't expecting that, I'm not sure about that. So a good first impression relies on giving someone exactly what they expect, telling them exactly what they want to hear, and sort of ticking all of their boxes, which sounds a little bit superficial from my point of view anyway, so it makes it hard to do, but unfortunately that's just the way these things work. So anyway, they are my thoughts on how to get a job with those two different approaches. Hopefully you found some of that helpful or interesting. And in part 2, I'm going to go through the 4 common issues that come up when you're trying to keep a job. So stay tuned for that, and I'll see you soon. Bye. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit subscribe for weekly content just like this one. If you'd like to get even more involved, you can join the discussion on social media or support me by becoming a patron. Finally, I value your time, and you'll notice all my videos are ad-free, so please help me to cover what you want to hear by leaving me a comment and telling me what you think. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you another time. Okay, so welcome to part 2 of Asperger's in Employment. In part 1, we looked at 2 approaches to getting a job, and in this video I'm going to outline 4 key areas that can very easily lead to problems with keeping a job. And so we'll look at some ways to try and mitigate some of those risks. So the first area is communication. So what I mean by this is essentially miscommunication, misunderstanding, missed information that was delivered but not really received. So an example of this might be, I personally find it difficult to remember information if it's in written form. So if someone sends me a long email, then chances are I'm going to skim it, and chances are I'm going to miss the key part if the key part wasn't really highlighted. So if you're trying to give me an important piece of information, for example, you need to be at this meeting tomorrow afternoon, and it's via email, there is a significant chance that I might miss that piece of information and therefore not make it to that important meeting. Whereas all you had to do was tap me on the shoulder and say, hey, there's a meeting right now, we need to go, and that would not have been a problem. But unfortunately, especially in bigger companies, it's really common for information to just sort of be disseminated, and they just assume that everyone has received that information. But I've found, and I've worked a lot with people on the spectrum, you really need to make sure that the information has been received. So the best way to do that is to check. Did you get that email, or can you please reply to let me know that you've got this message? And when that has happened, then we've sort of got a feedback loop of, I sent you the message, yes, you definitely received it, I know that you received it, great. Communication is good. And that strategy can also be used to avoid misunderstandings as well. So if I'm asking you to do something, you might interpret that in a different way than I intended. So if I ask you to do something and I get you to repeat it back to me, or I get you to write down the key points or something like that, then I've got that feedback, and I know that the message that you received is the same message that I gave you. So that kind of thing can help a lot, and I know I do that a lot. Whenever anyone asks me to do something, I repeat it back to them and say, great, I think I understand, just checking, you want me to do this and then this and then this for this reason, right? And they go, yeah, that's really good. And also, if I get it right, it means that they have confidence that I've properly understood. So that's my personal strategy for that, trying to avoid that kind of misunderstanding. The second area is to do with sensory and processing needs. So for me, for example, if there's like the radio on in the background or something, which is common in some workplaces, it means I can't think straight. So I need to let my needs be known in that sense. Otherwise, it's going to seriously affect my performance, and no one's going to know the reason why. So sometimes that could be lights or background noise, or the most socially awkward one is when a person has a particularly strong perfume. I know that can be a problem for me, and I haven't really found a great way to deal with that yet. But those are issues that can come up. So in general here, I found from my experience that the less formal approaches to getting accommodations tend to work a bit better. So I'm not going to fill out a form and mail it to HR and say, can I please have this and this and this for this reason? I'm just going to try and manipulate my little surroundings as best that I can to get really small concessions from the people that it affects most. Now that might be talking to my team and saying, it really helps me to work if I have headphones in. So if you ever need to talk to me, it's completely fine, just pat me on the shoulder, it's fine, but it's going to be massively better for my productivity if I can have headphones in. And if the small amount of people around me understand that, then it's not a problem and no one else needs to know about it. So the third area that commonly comes up as an issue is when someone has a gap in skill set. Most people, just your average human being, will be more or less equally competent in all of their skills, right? And I've tried to graph that here because this is one of the ways that you can kind of understand what autism and Asperger's is, or one of the ways that I like to understand it, because there are some things that I am insanely good at and some things that I am horrendously poor at. And the easiest thing for me to do in life is to just avoid the things that I find difficult, because it's not hard to avoid most of the time. However, sometimes in a work situation, I will be forced into a situation where I'm being asked to do something that I am particularly poor at doing. And if there's no way around that, that can be a real problem. So what I find is that other people just assume, because I'm really good at this and really good at this and really good at this, they assume I will also be really good at something else that I'm really not good at. So that can be a really big problem. It can also be really hard to understand from the other person's perspective. What do you mean you can't tie your shoelaces? Or what do you mean you can't make a phone call? Or what do you mean you can't read a map? Or something like that. And with Asperger's, these kinds of gaps in the skill set are incredibly common, and we tend to be pretty good at avoiding them most of the time, but sometimes it's not possible to avoid. So the strategy that I use for this personally is to be as upfront as possible with my limitations. And it can be really hard to get people to understand, but the more someone knows me, explaining about Asperger's can help sometimes, but the more someone knows me, the more they can start to believe, wow, you're really good at this. I can't believe you can't do that. What do you mean you can't do that? So if they know that I have a particular difficulty with a particular thing, then it's usually not a problem to shuffle things around a bit so that I don't have to do that exact thing and I can do something else instead. And the brilliant thing about working in a team is that you don't need to be good at absolutely everything, right? I bring my gifts to the team, someone else brings their gifts, and with the best of me and the best of you and the best of everyone else, then we've got a really, really strong team. And it means that I don't have to do the things that I'm particularly poor at doing. Okay, so the last area that I'll mention that can become a big issue at work is the social aspect. And I do not mean the social aspect of work. That's actually relatively straightforward. I can go and talk to someone about my job, and I can call someone on the phone and I can interview them and I can do a presentation and all that kind of stuff. You can learn all those professional skills and be fine at that. What I'm talking about is the purely social stuff, being in the vicinity of other human beings, that has absolutely nothing to do with work. And actually those relationships, those friendships that are built on the purely social stuff make a really big difference in the workplace in terms of getting stuff done. Because when someone likes you as a friend, it makes it a lot easier to actually work with them. So the fact that I might be a little bit more aloof outside of work actually makes it more difficult inside of work. It also makes it more difficult when everyone at work goes out after work and I don't come with them, for example. So they're all going to the pub. I don't particularly want to go to the pub. I'm really tired because I've spent a whole day at work. I want to go home. So if I do that, I'm missing out on these social connections that actually make a really big difference back at work. And all of a sudden I'm the outsider, even though at work I'm just as included, because outside of work I've excluded myself, or I haven't been as social with the other people outside of it. Okay, so they were my 4 challenges that people on the autism spectrum typically face in terms of trying to keep a job. There are also lots of other things outside of work that can make that difficult, but we could talk about that forever. This is a massive topic. 2 other video topics that I'm thinking of doing are one on my own personal employment history, just to give you a sense of, you know, the kind of road that I've been on, and another video on possibly disclosure, because that's a really big topic as well, especially related to employment. So if there are other things that you would like me to cover, please let me know in the comments. Otherwise, please like, subscribe, share, all of those things. There are no ads on my videos, so please support me on Patreon so I can keep putting my energy into this. And otherwise, I will see you again soon. Okay, bye. Okay, so on the topic of employment, I thought it would be good to share a bit about my job history, just so that you've got like a sense of one person's journey in that sense. I've never really been interested in a job for the sake of a job. And so fortunately, I've been really lucky in the sense that I've been able to live at home with my parents throughout all of my high school and university, which meant that I did have some jobs, but I didn't absolutely need a job during those years. So I've never done the fast food thing or the retail thing or any of those other kind of casual jobs. And a couple of reasons for that is that, one, I just don't like a job for the sake of a job. I would much prefer to just not spend any money, so not have a job, not earn money, not spend money, than have a job for the sake of a job, have money for the sake of money, spend money, buy stuff that I don't need for the sake of buying stuff that I don't need. That's just not how I roll. If I want something, then I get it. If I don't want anything, then I'm happy with what I've got. So the kind of jobs that I went for were seasonal, essentially. Like I had a job at a Christmas tree farm, which was fun when I was 16. I had seasonal jobs marking exam papers. I had some jobs during university where, like, summer jobs, which were essentially industry placements for my engineering degree. They were pretty good. And I've also done a lot of other volunteer work, so for charities, running stuff for kids, running camps, doing admin stuff for sports clubs at universities, and I was actually a university tour guide for quite a few years, which was kind of like an ad hoc job. They would say, we've got this high school group coming to your university this afternoon. How would you like to be their tour guide for, you know, a modest amount per hour? Like, okay, sure, why not? So I can't remember how I got into that, but that was an interesting experience. It took a lot of practice to become confident speaking to 20 or so high school students. I also did some private tutoring for high school maths and physics while I was studying my engineering degree at university. And again, the reason that worked is because it was once off, it was flexible, I could do what I wanted, I could teach the way I wanted, and it was really results based. So if the student was happy, if the student was learning, I was doing a good job. I didn't have to put on a mask, I didn't have to wear anything special, I didn't have to do anything special to please some kind of company. I could do things my way to get good results my way. And so those kind of jobs suited me really well. So despite the fact that I didn't really have a lot of employment history compared to some people who basically had a part-time job ever since they were 16, I managed to get my very first preference of engineering jobs after university. And the reason for that was that I had my eye on this job for maybe 18 months. And I knew exactly the one I wanted, and I did absolutely everything that I could possibly do to make sure that I was going to get that job. I was going to be top of the list when it came to selecting people for that job, even though it was quite competitive. Very interestingly, I also applied for a lot of other engineering jobs in my final year at university. just because I couldn't be sure that I would get this job, and I thought, you know, I should definitely apply for all of these other things that I'm equally qualified to do. But interestingly, I didn't get any of those jobs. So I'm not sure really what the difference is there. Maybe it just goes to show that I'm not naturally good at interviewing or applying, or I don't look as good on paper as I kind of imagine that I do, because I have really good university grades, but not really much else. So when I was applying for the one that I really wanted, I was so motivated for that that I checked every single box that I could possibly do. What can I possibly do to make sure that I am their first pick when it comes to candidates? So I guess it just goes to show that if the motivation is high enough, then I am willing to put in the effort and do whatever it takes to get that job. And as I mentioned in the other video on how to get a job, I practiced and practiced and practiced and practiced so that I nailed that interview. And yeah, so hundreds of hours of practice can get you a long way if you know what you want. So that was my main professional job. I worked for 5 years as an aircraft structural engineer for Boeing, doing design work on commercial airplanes. And although that was actually a really good job in almost every respect, it was completely unsustainable. So after 5 years, I was completely spent, and I basically had to quit because I couldn't see myself. I was putting so much effort into just getting up and going to work and getting stuff done and coming home that I didn't have any other time for anything else in my life. And that meant that it was unsustainable and I needed to quit. So I spent a couple of years off, not working at all, and ever since then I've relied on connections and my reputation and just sort of chance meetings and my interests to get me sort of ad hoc work after that. So in the last couple of years, I've started this blog. I've done other work for autistic organizations, mentoring others on the spectrum, and doing some public speaking and running professional development workshops for teachers, you know, teaching them about Asperger's and how to deal with certain things. Yeah, and now I'm focusing on this blog. Hopefully that's something that I can keep going with in my life. I would really like to keep sharing some of my story with you and hopefully helping you out with advice and things based on my own experience. And also this new emotional intelligence training online that is really exciting because that's been my special interest my entire life. So I'm really excited at the fact that I might end up doing that and actually having that as a paid part of my life, which would be really fun. So I'm really not sure how this story is coming across. I guess it could be anywhere from, wow, you're amazing, you've done so many things, you can do anything, to, what are you doing? Can't you just pick something? Why don't you have a job? It's a little bit hard to tell people that I haven't really had a real job in 5 years, but having a real job is really hard. So for better or worse, I am on this more difficult path, which is potentially also more rewarding, but is legitimately really difficult. And hopefully I can find a way to get some kind of sustainable employment in the future. When I think about it, I think surely I have so many skills that are desperately needed by so many people. Surely I can find a job. But at the same time, there's just not enough. There are so many other factors that make having the skills to do a good job not enough to actually get a job. But that's okay, one step at a time. Anyway, maybe I should end it there for today. Hopefully you found my story interesting. If not, completely fine, let me know and I'll talk about something that's more useful to you. Thanks for watching and I'll see you again another time. Bye. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit subscribe for weekly content just like this one. If you'd like to get even more involved, you can join the discussion on social media or support me by becoming a patron. Finally, I value your time, and you'll notice all my videos are ad-free, so please help me to cover what you want to hear by leaving me a comment and telling me what you think. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you another time. Okay, love you, bye-bye. Hi everyone, welcome back to Asperger's from the Inside. This video is going to be a little bit different to my normal style, so instead of talking to you based on my own experience, what I'm going to be doing instead is sharing real life examples that you have left as comments on my previous videos. So a little while back I made a video called Good Jobs for Aspies, and one of the most interesting things for me about that video were all the comments that I got from people sharing what their perfect job was. I found my ideal job in this area for this reason. So I'm going to be reading out some of those comments today. They start off reasonably stereotypical, but there's a few interesting ones in the end there, so I hope you enjoy it. Right, so this one says, I work as a full-time cabinet maker, very repetitive, and I can build a cabinet in routines. I even have a sign on my bench, an Aspie at work. When I had a job baking bread, the owner of the business once told me, I don't know what you're doing in here, but they've doubled our order, so keep doing it. I just can't look at what you're doing. Also, I know I don't always read these word for word. That's because reading is difficult and I get confused if I read word for word, so bear with me on that one. Right, this one's in fast food, and I won't read the whole thing, but basically I worked in fast food during the 8 PM to 2 AM shift. I got to do the drive-through, so I didn't have too much face-to-face time. They had me clean the bathrooms and dining room after closing, and I did the best job of them all. So ultimately I had to do it all the time instead of taking turns. But I liked doing a thorough and efficient job. I take pride in what I produce, and once again, I didn't have to deal with emotional BS. Does anyone know what BS stands for? I used to work in Canada in a warehouse doing custom picking and packing for shipping orders, and I found it very rewarding, plus there was no judgment about my ASD. It was different enough every day to be interesting, but routine enough that I had comfort in the mechanics of how everything worked. It was perfect. So we have one that did personal home cleaning. Landscape and horticulture are incredibly therapeutic and fun. I had quite a few from the armed forces actually. So this one says, the army is ideal because you are told to go here, go there, do this, do that. One retired from a successful law enforcement career, loved it, wish I could still be doing it. It was perfect for me and I excelled there. Another one, law enforcement officer is absolutely the perfect job for me. I want to join the army. Another really popular category were people finding jobs as drivers of various sorts, so truck drivers, bus drivers, taxi drivers, delivery drivers. This one says, this was the perfect job for me because I'm alone in my lorry all day. I don't have to talk to anyone and I can listen to the radio all day, and my lorry is my personal space that no one else can invade. I love it. I'm a London black cab driver. It's the best job for me. I'm my own boss, got my own routine, don't have to talk to anyone, no eye contact. I'm also the best cab driver in London, which I feel is down to having Asperger's. I found pizza driving to be a good fit for me because although it's kind of repetitive, you can choose how to get there differently each time. Human interactions are less than 2 minutes. I'm a courier and I love it. I get to spend the vast majority of my day in the car singing, something that I really love to do. I don't have to think about the job at hand much. I can completely focus on listening to things that interest me. I'm in heaven. Well, this one's interesting. I enjoyed driving the school bus because although you had lots of kids, they weren't directly talking to me. So that's interesting. Truck lorry driving works for me. We also had some people that outline some of their hyperproductivity. So this one says, I've written a master's thesis in 3 days, 100 pages on competition law. When I'm working on something, I don't eat, wash, clean the house, etc. So that's pretty stereotypical. Another person said, I took a geometry course that could be done at your own pace and did a year's worth of work in 16 days with 98%. So they were some jobs that you might, some kind of stereotypical jobs that you might expect from your stereotypical Aspie who likes to work alone. We also had quite a few artists. One said, I'm an Aspie who's about to go into college for animation. I work as an interior designer. The good thing is that once I learn what the client wants, it's all creativity and maneuvering in design until we end up with satisfactory results. I have an Aspie husband who's a farmer, and my Aspie son wants to be a tattoo artist like his mum. The best job I ever had was as a 3D artist in a studio, working together with other like-minded people. It wasn't just the best job I've ever had, they were the best 3 months of my life. Working with animals is great too, people suck. I'm working in a kindergarten. The job is ideal for me because children are interacting in a direct way and they don't use irony or sarcasm. They just talk about their feelings and don't hold them back. My brother is a barrister in the UK. He has many excellent Aspie lawyers working for him. He comments that their attention to detail and motivation are excellent. Radiography is also pretty good. My son's surgeon is an Aspie. I'm going into the medical field as a medical assistant. I love helping people and the organisation of the job fits perfectly for me. So I really love this one. This may shock people, but I found my ideal job to be in the park service. Dare I say, it's like I've turned my nature of being able to store and talk about one kind of information for hours into something I'm literally paid for. It's ironic since people would think Asperger's would make me not want to talk, but people expect someone who has all this information in my position. And a similar one, I'm also working in a state park. It really helped me to overcome my fear of public speaking as well as learning and showing technical skills. This is one of my favorites actually. I found my niche in life as an in-home appliance technician. On the surface, it seems like something that would be terrifying, going into strangers' homes and fixing their stuff. But being out on my own and solving problems with my own skill set is highly satisfying. I absolutely love fixing things and problem solving. I think one of the reasons I love that one is because it shows that what seems to be difficult on the surface might actually be a really good fit depending on how it works out. And with that in mind, the whole point of my original video was that we can do everything and it's the environment that makes the difference of whether it works out or not. So my last job, I had clear goals and a supervisor who was very direct with me, gave good advice and was very straightforward with how things worked. I thrived there. I love this comment as well. I believe that more awareness and acceptance towards Aspies will, in the long run, take us away from isolated jobs. I mean, in my experience, the problem with non-isolated jobs is people expecting me to work and behave in the same way as everyone else. So if that gets better, I can see myself working with other people again. Anyway, so we might leave it there. You've seen quite a few examples. I could go on, but obviously I don't want this video to be too long. So a little while ago, I shared my story about trying to earn a living, so I'll put a link to that video here. It was all about trying to become financially sustainable, starting my own business online, teaching emotional intelligence. So if you haven't already seen what I'm doing at emotionsexplained.com.au, then make sure you check it out because everything there is designed for people like you and me. Bye.
Welcome back to Asperger's from the Inside. This month's Patron's Choice video topic is, isn't everyone a little bit autistic? And the answer to this question is no. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you'd like to subscribe to the channel, I'm kidding, obviously. This is a very interesting question because when you think about it intellectually, of course the answer is no. And to be honest, the first thing I want to say in response to this question is when someone says this, it immediately shuts me down and dismisses my experience. So hopefully I'll explain in this video why that's the case, and we'll explore a little bit more around the intricacies of what is behind this kind of question and this kind of thinking. So the first thing to note is that having autistic traits, having some autistic traits, does not make you a little bit autistic any more than being sad sometimes makes you a little bit clinically depressed, or liking to keep your house clean makes you a little bit OCD. Or another popular one that was shared with me recently, if you have indigestion and swollen ankles, that doesn't make you a little bit pregnant, does it? So one of the reasons that this phrase is very misleading is because it makes it sound as if autism is a linear spectrum from not very autistic down this end to extremely autistic down the other end. And that is absolutely not what it means to be a spectrum. So to understand that a bit better, every good lie has a really tiny element of truth that is just believable enough to make it stick. So when someone says we're all on the spectrum, that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, if you think about neurodiversity, all of our brains are different. Surely that difference is just a distribution, and then if you're different enough, then you get autism, so we're all a little bit different. That kind of makes sense, right? But again, that explanation invalidates the autistic experience. If you imagine that there's a theoretical normal and most people kind of fall with a bit of diversity around that, some people are short, some people are tall, all that kind of stuff, within a certain range, we still kind of call that normal because it doesn't present a problem. It doesn't show up as different, it doesn't get noticed. Whereas if you're out here, this is the kind of autistic experience where the normies, who are all kind of trying to compete, who can be the most different, who can be edgy and cool and all that kind of stuff. And if you're out here, the kind of attention you're going to get is not, oh, that's cool. It's, wow, what's wrong with you? You're a broken individual and we need to fix you so that you can be like us. That's a very different experience to just being a little bit different and having your standard level of diversity. So I'm not trying to be cool. I'm not trying to say, look at me, look how different I am, but I need my difference to be acknowledged so that I can be included. Otherwise, it's just dismissed and there's a barrier to being understood in that way. Being this different introduces a whole bunch of additional social challenges. And let me use like average variation in height, for example, right? Some people are short, some people are tall. If you're too tall, all of a sudden you're banging your head on everything and you can't fit through doorways and things like that. And similarly, if you're too short, all of a sudden you can't reach things that other people can reach. You can't drive a car because you can't reach the pedals. And it becomes a social disability because the world that you live in is not designed to be accessible for you because you fall outside the realm of what people call normal and designed for. So that makes a big difference. It's not just the difference itself, it's the secondary things that the difference cause. And with autism, it's not just one thing that's different. It's a whole bunch of different things that are all slightly atypical in all of these different ways that are different for every autistic individual. The common thread is that the sum product of what those differences lead to is the feeling of being so far outside the norm that it makes it very difficult to connect with people. It's social isolation, it's the world telling you you're broken, it's all these types of things that kind of make the backbone of the autistic experience. So when you line up your pens and think, oh, aren't I a little bit autistic? Or when you have a routine that you like to stick to and you don't like to change it, that's not really the same thing as a lifetime of rejection and feeling like you don't fit in. Not even a little bit. Okay, so why do people say, isn't everyone a little bit autistic? There's a couple of nice reasons why people might try and say this. It could be to try and empathize. Look, you know, I have autistic traits too, aren't they normal? It could be to try and say that I understand your experience. It could be to try and bring the autistic person closer into this, you know, I want to pretend that you're closer so that it's easier to bring you in and have you included in society. Unfortunately, what it does is it trivializes this difference by making it sound a lot smaller than it is. And the effect that that has is it communicates the message that I already understand, which is the opposite of the message that I want to understand. So this message of I already understand shuts the conversation down and doesn't allow for any more connection. And unfortunately, the message it also communicates is I have no idea what you're going through and I don't care. So imagine I'm sharing with you, I've just come back from military service overseas and I am deeply scarred by the things that I've seen and done. I have serious post-traumatic stress disorder. I lost a leg to a landmine. I nearly died in the battlefield. And your response is, oh, I completely get it. The other day, I had a paper cut. It hurt so much, I thought I was going to die. I literally thought I was going to die. I've never been in so much pain in my entire life. I completely get where you're coming from. It makes sense. Yep, makes sense. Those two things are not anywhere near similar. And what the second person has done by trying to empathize and trying to bring their own experience into it is actually to trivialize what is a serious experience into what is just like an everyday experience. So instead, an adequate response is to desire to understand more, just to listen and acknowledge what's being said. So let's say I'm talking to another autistic person and they're sharing about their crippling social anxiety, saying, you have no idea how hard it is to desperately want to leave the house and feel like you can't, right? I can only imagine what that must be like. I haven't had that experience firsthand. That must be really tough. I would like to understand. I would like to hear more from you and try and understand your experience and connect with you. Okay, so lastly, this whole idea of being a little bit autistic eventually ends up in the accusation that I am only a little bit autistic. And what that does is completely invalidates my experience of trying to explain my difference to others and not being believed. And when people don't believe my difference, I can't even ask for help. I have a friend of mine who found out she was on the spectrum after her daughter was diagnosed. And she was a full-time parent at home with 2 young kids, and she was having serious trouble getting the housework done, right? Now, that might not sound too abnormal, but in her case, it wasn't just, oh, this is hard, there's a lot of work to do and I'm not really getting on top of it. It was crippling anxiety, looking at a to-do list and just being incapacitated and unable to start because of the thought of all the things that she needed to do. So it was hard to get help because it sounded like, oh yeah, every parent at home has that issues, kids are demanding, yeah, we get it. Actually, no, they didn't get it. The solution to her problem, which she eventually found, was to have a visual schedule with a picture of a vacuum cleaner, for example. And for some reason, seeing the picture didn't cause that same anxiety, and she was able to see what she needed to do and just get it done, and all of a sudden, problem was solved. Right? This is not your typical, I'm just busy, I'm just got kids and housework is difficult. There was something significantly different behind that, and if people don't see that difference, then you can't even ask for the help that you need. So I guess my final point is that autism is real. It's a real thing. Even autism that you can't see is a real thing, and this is especially an issue for women who are very good at masking. Don't dismiss us, listen to us instead. In order to include me, my difference needs to be acknowledged. So please believe us, especially we go to a lot of trouble and some people go to a significant expense to get an official diagnosis just to prove that we're not crazy. So please believe us, please stop saying you're a little bit autistic and making fun at our expense. That's not very nice. If you would like to have your say in next month's Patron's Choice video, you can become a cup of coffee supporter of this channel for less than $1 a week. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you another time. Bye. How many friends am I going to make if I take off all my clothes and run through a shopping center naked, trying to hug people and say, won't somebody please accept me as I am? It doesn't work like that, clearly, does it? So it's no secret that trying to make friends is one of the biggest challenges for a lot of people on the autism spectrum. So today I'm going to share a little bit of insight into a couple of reasons as to why that is, and share what is, in my opinion, the absolute worst advice you can possibly give to someone on the spectrum who is trying to make friends and struggling to make friends. So when I think back to my childhood, especially my sort of early primary years, those kind of really early childhood years, I didn't know that I was supposed to copy everyone else around me. So I was the kid in kindergarten where everyone else was copying the dance moves of the teacher, and I was just looking at everyone else thinking, oh, this is really strange. Everyone else is doing the same thing. I wonder why. How curious. So it's like I just completely lacked the instinct to copy everyone else and fit in and do what everyone else was doing. So because of this, I ended up just doing whatever I felt like. And the natural consequence of that is I ended up not being included in what the other kids were doing. So it became harder and harder to relate to the other kids my own age. And then pretty soon, as we started growing up, they started assuming that I didn't want to be part of them, that I didn't want to do whatever they were doing. And that led to being on the outside and trying to figure out, for a lot of my life, especially my teenage years, looking from the outside, trying to figure out, how do I get in to this little community of other people? Because I desperately wanted to connect with other people and be included in that space, but I didn't know how to do that without just copying what everyone else was doing. So the natural reaction to that is to think that if I want to be included in whatever they're doing, I need to act like them and talk like them and be like them so that they can accept me and we can be friends. So maybe you can see where I'm going with this. Obviously, trying to fit in at all costs can create some significant issues, so much so that you may have seen on social media this week the hashtag Take the Mask Off, raising awareness for the toll that having to wear a mask and try to pass as normal can take on autistic people who feel that that is the only way that they're ever going to be accepted by society and have this connection to other people that we all crave as human beings. So with that in mind, I want to talk about a really common piece of advice that's actually really good for most people, but probably the worst thing you could possibly say to someone on the autism spectrum, and that is the advice to just be yourself and stop caring what other people think. Now, on the surface, that might sound like a really good idea, and if I'm trying to fit in at all costs, surely it's better to just be myself. However, if we dial this all the way back to the beginning, the reason that I am in this mess in the first place is because when I was really little, I didn't care what other people thought about me. And because of that, I wasn't trying to fit in, I wasn't trying to do what everyone else did, and I was 100% being myself without thinking of what the consequences would be for me socially to do that. So while 99% of the population probably does care too much about what other people think and probably does feel this inherent drive to fit in at all costs, I've found that people on the spectrum tend to be the opposite. And I know this was definitely true for me. I actually needed encouragement to do those socially acceptable things that everyone else took for granted. So interestingly, if the worst advice you can possibly give is just be yourself and don't care at all about what anyone else thinks, the next worst advice is the exact opposite, which is fit in at all costs, wear that mask, always perform in public. So let's remember what the goal is, right? The goal is to find a way to be connected and included and feel valued, loved and accepted by the other people in our lives. I would like friends. I want to have meaningful relationships. I want to be employed. I want to have a place in society with other people. So if I don't care about what other people think, it's going to be almost impossible to achieve all that. But at the same time, if I care too much about what other people think, then I'm not going to be myself enough to form any genuine connection with another person. One of the things that I've learned in my journey towards emotional intelligence is that what other people think and feel about me makes a huge difference to how they treat me. People that like me will treat me better. People that don't like me will treat me worse. So obviously it's important for people to like me and to understand me. Otherwise, I will be treated unfairly by other people my entire life. And we all know what that looks like, right? Chronic unemployment, social isolation, right? The list goes on, and it's really not pretty. So telling people to just be yourself and not care about what other people think, that's actually a really sad place to end up. And unfortunately, it is the message that I hear from a lot of especially adults on the spectrum who have been so burned by trying to fit into society that they say, no, that's it, I'm not trying anymore, I can't try anymore, I'm just going to accept the rejection of society, I'm not going to try and connect, I'm not going to try and make friends, I've given up on making friends, I've given up on trying to find meaningful relationships. And that is not a fun place to be. So my message instead is do not give up on making meaningful connections with other people. It's 100% possible to be yourself and find that connection and inclusion at the same time. It's all about finding a socially acceptable version of what being myself looks like. So if I go out in public, I don't want to cover myself up. I want to express myself in a way that is going to be received well by others. A good analogy is like wearing clothes, right? My body is perfectly fine exactly how it is, but for social reasons, when I'm on camera, when I'm in public, I wear clothes over the top of my body to express who I am in a way that is socially acceptable. To strip off everything and say, this is the raw naked me all the time, 100%, that is not in a format that allows people to receive that well. How many friends am I going to make if I run through a shopping centre naked saying, won't somebody please accept me exactly how I am? It doesn't work like that in society. Everyone has a version of themselves, ideally an authentic version of themselves, that they put forward in any given situation. There are things that I say and do when I'm home alone that I would not say and do in a professional setting, for example. Am I less myself in the professional setting? No, hopefully not. Hopefully my version, my professional version of myself, my on-camera, for example, version of myself, is still an authentic version. It's just the version that is appropriate for what I am doing right now. Sometimes people call this the socially constructed self. It's still myself. I'm still being myself. It's just the side of myself that I'm going to show to any given person at any given time to maximize my chance of connection with that person and being included in that setting. Okay, well, I hope I've been making sense today. I really want to support the Take the Mask Off campaign because it's really important that we don't cover up who we are to try and fit in, because that prevents the possibility of genuine connection with other people unless we can be ourselves first. But on the other hand, if I don't care at all about what other people think of me, I've essentially given up on trying to make that connection and trying to be included in the society that I live in. And that can have some pretty extreme negative consequences, unfortunately. So thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed that. I'm clearly very passionate about this topic of inclusion and helping people build that genuine connection. So please share this video if you'd like to support the Take the Mask Off campaign. And yeah, I'll see you another time. Bye.
If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit subscribe for weekly content just like this one. If you'd like to get even more involved, you can join the discussion on social media or support me by becoming a patron. Finally, I value your time, and you'll notice all my videos are ad-free, so please help me to cover what you want to hear by leaving me a comment and telling me what you think. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you another time.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Asperger's from the Inside. You're here with Paul. Today I'm looking at a question of why are relationships so difficult? Maybe you've asked this question before yourself. I know I definitely hear it a lot from others and have felt it myself. Sometimes it feels like when we're alone, everything's easy, and suddenly when we're in a relationship with other people, whether that's a friendship or in a family or a romantic relationship, suddenly things become significantly more difficult. So why is that? It turns out there's actually a really good reason for that, which I want to discuss a little bit today. Because a lot of the time it feels like, is a relationship even worth the work because it's so much hard work and it's so difficult to maintain, and we think, well, is it just gonna break down eventually anyway? So what's the point in trying? I hear a lot of people say that they've been burned so much before that they even believe, maybe I'm just not cut out to have friends. Maybe having friends is too difficult. Maybe I don't need friends. Maybe I'm better off without friends. That's not the case. Human beings need some level of social connection. Autistic people are no different. We all need some level of social connection. I can fully understand where that sentiment comes from, because relationships can be really, really challenging. But it's also important to remember that giving up having a relationship, giving up having friendships, giving up that social connection is not really a viable, healthy option. As much as we might wish it were the case that we could have an easy way out, unfortunately there's no easy way out. So let me give you an analogy to see why sometimes being in a relationship is more difficult or challenging than being on your own. And my analogy is like of dancing. So you can imagine if you're dancing by yourself, you don't need to worry about anybody else. You can have the craziest dance moves, you can dance with your eyes shut, you can move this way and that way, and it really doesn't matter what you do. You're having a good time, and everything is completely fine. If you wanted to dance with somebody else and interact with that person and have fun with that connection, then all of a sudden the way that you're dancing and the way that you're moving is completely different, because it has to be a little bit in sync, communicating with the other person. So that means that we actually can't, we lose a degree of freedom that we previously had. Previously, I could do whatever I want and it didn't matter. Now, all of a sudden, I'm in a relationship. There is someone else in my life, in my sphere of influence, which means that the things that I do have an effect on the other person, which means that we need to be in sync a little bit so that we can have a relationship, dance together, and have a good time. The reason I like this analogy is because you can imagine if we're not in sync, then someone's going to get an elbow to the face, or have someone step on their feet, or get kicked in the shins or something, right? It's not fun to be really, really close to somebody and to have them hurt you. That's why when we get close to people, sometimes the people we're closest to are the ones that hurt us the most, which is why sometimes intimacy, actually opening ourselves up to that intimacy, is really scary. So there's I talked about attachment strategies, attachment types, and typical behavior patterns in a previous video. And you can imagine that when we're dancing too close and we're not really in sync and we're stepping on each other's toes, one person might try to cling on and try and dance even closer and say, look, even though I know this is not good for me, I'm going to stay anyway. And the other person might think, this is not fun. I'm going to go away where you can't hurt me anymore. Now, if we want to build a healthy relationship, if we want friendships, if we want healthy supportive family relationships, romantic partners, all of these things which are so important, it's a matter of learning how to find that middle ground of taking a little bit of space if we're too close and we're bumping into each other, take a little bit of space, and so that we can continue to interact, continue to learn about each other, continue to learn how to be in sync and have this relationship. It's actually, so I do a lot of relationship coaching. So I'm in a bit of a special position that I hear a lot of different people's relationships. Most people only have information about our own relationship, so it's easy to think that we're the only one. And I want to share something that's basically universal in almost every relationship. And that is, the closer we get to a person, the harder it becomes. Because the things that our own issues that were lying dormant in us suddenly start coming to the surface when we have to interact with another person and form a relationship with another person. All of a sudden, if we have any rejection issues or a fear of intimacy, or maybe we've been hurt in the past, or maybe we really value our freedom and we're not sure what this whole compromise thing looks like to learn to live with another person. All of those issues that we already had suddenly start coming to the surface when we get in a relationship with someone, especially an intimate relationship with someone. And the reason I'm mentioning this is when that happens, sometimes it's easy to think, oh, it's a problem with this person, it's a problem with this relationship, I need to end this relationship and find a better relationship. Whereas actually, if you're feeling that, it's probably because the relationship is doing what it's designed to do. Relationships can be incredibly healing. And one of the reasons that they're healing is because they bring back up to the surface all of our past history and past trauma and past issues, and they bring them to the surface and force us to deal with them so that we can then move on through them. So that's one of the reasons that relationships can be so healing, but also why they can be so difficult at the same time. So if you're finding that you're in a relationship and it is really difficult, it's not necessarily a bad sign. It might mean that you have to make a little bit of distance. Maybe you're trying to be too close too quickly when you're not really ready for it. So we need to learn how to dance together. And the better that we can understand each other, the more we can be in sync with each other and form a relationship that's actually healthy and healing, as opposed to just traumatic because every 2 seconds someone's stepping on my toes or elbowing me in the face. So where was I? So I think I had a final point. Did I have a final point? If not, I'll find out in a minute. Maybe that's it. Yep, it will come to me as soon as I hit pause or off. It's the end of a long week. Words sometimes flow. You might notice I talk really quickly. That's because if I talk slowly, I forget what I'm saying. Anyway, I hope you found this video valuable. I want to encourage you to persevere and find healthy relationships, because we all need that social connection, even when we feel like we want to stay by ourselves sometimes. That's what I was going to say. We don't need to be really close to another person all the time. So imagine if I'm dancing by myself, I've got all of this freedom and I want to dance with someone else. Maybe that's great for a little while. And then I say, well, this has been fun. I'm going to go dance with myself for a little bit where I can have all of this freedom and express myself however I want. And then I'm going to come back. So we can look after ourselves in the way that suits us the best, and build a kind of relationship where we're able to dance by ourselves sometimes if we need to, and we're also able to connect with other special people in our life as well. It's not an either-or thing, and if we can have a little bit of both, then it's what allows us to really look after ourselves, and what allows us to really build that connection as well. So that's going to have to do for today. Hope you found that interesting and you could relate to that, let me know what you think in the comments. If you find relationships difficult, what your particular challenges are and how you deal with that so that you can make the relationship a healing one. And I will see you again next week. Okay, bye.
芦屋ドーマン、お前が黒幕か。
愚かなり。
生命か。余計な真似を。また玉城を集め直さねば。
相変わらず可愛げのない。少々術支度に手間取りましたが、無事で何より。平安の願いが込められたこの都も悪しき改まのはびこる地となり、戦場と見まがうほどの惨状になり果てました。陰陽の道は万物の調和を律して世を平穏に導く術。この術を託し、共に当麻の道を歩むは心を許し合う同士。今日の闇を切り裂くは羅生門へもたらされた新たな光。光を宿すまれびとは平安への大いなる吉兆。
可愛げだと。
それでは消そうの相手さえおりますまい。ここは一つ折り紙でも覚えてみては。
いらぬおせっかいだ。当方が消そうなど。
ほら、お待ちですよ。
鬼を切る鬼とは実に珍しいな。今なら空きがあるぞ。
羅生門で我々を襲ったドーマンの行方が知れました。祭りごとの中枢大代理でその姿を見た者がいるそうです。今日を覆う怨霊やあやかし、その源は大代理にありと見るべきでしょう。ドーマンは私と同じ陰陽師。数年前に姿を消し、以来行方は妖として知れなかったのですが。
ドーマンはな、生命との術勝負に敗れ今日を出奔したのだ。実力以上の野心を抱く男だったが、身に余る力に見入られたようだ。さて、黒幕が知れればトーマ頭の務めは一つ。ドーマンを撃つ。お前も来るだろう。
どれ。土産話はあるのだろうな。役立てるがよい。役立てるがよい。役立てるがよい。
いらっしゃい。
まれびとは歓迎するぞ。土産話はあるのだろうな。